Representative Richie Torres, he's a Democrat, most known in left circles for being vehemently pro-Israel to a comical degree. He went on MSNBC, I believe here, and said something that is beyond absurd while discussing the reconciliation negotiation currently going on.
The Progressive Caucus is enormously grateful to President Biden, who's emerged as the most progressive president in the history of the United States. He's a man on a mission. He's intent on passing not one but two of the largest infrastructure investments in American history. And the purpose of the meeting was to impress upon members of Congress a sense of urgency around landing these planes as swiftly and as smoothly as we can.
Most progressive president in U.S. history, Joe Biden. Joe Biden, the most progressive president in U.S. history. That's almost too dumb to comment on. I'm not kidding, guys. I almost left this segment on the cutting room floor when I was prepping the show. I was like, should I talk about this? It's so ridiculous that I probably shouldn't. But I decided ultimately, no, not only am I going to respond, I'm going to respond in detail because this needs to be thoroughly debunked. Now, I don't think many people believe this, if anybody. But suffice to say, it is wildly off base. So first, let's go through the obvious things. Joe Biden was very clear on the campaign trail that I'm going to deliver on $2,000 checks to the American people. And he immediately went back on that when in power. Immediately. Broke his word on $2,000 checks. He broke his word on a national $15 minimum wage. That was supposed to be in the last reconciliation package. It didn't make it in. Now, you can say, hey, that's because of the 7 or 8 Democrats who were opposed to it, so it's not really Biden's fault. But if indeed he was the most progressive president in U.S. history, there are specifically 2 other presidents who would have found a way to twist some arms and get it in there. LBJ and FDR. Again, more on that in a little bit. He used Title 42, that's from the Trump era, to deport more people than Donald Trump. Does that sound like the most progressive president in U.S. history? He has the ability to eliminate all student loan debt with the swipe of a pen, and instead, he eliminated just $6 billion of $1.73 trillion in student loan debt. So you do the percentage on that. Not too pretty. He said that he'd veto Medicare for all if it got to his desk, even though we're the only developed country that doesn't have a universal healthcare system. And then he even abandoned a public option when in office, which is the thing that he ran on. Now, he kept us in Iraq. He kept us in Syria. He didn't get us back in the Iran deal, even though he promised to do it. And it was actually the policy of the administration where he was vice president, that Iran deal. So another way in which he's massively failed. Again, does any of this sound like the most progressive president in U.S. history? Now, listen, I'll tell you when he does good things. I'm not a hack, and so what are some of the good things? He did get us out of Afghanistan. I'm sure there's still drone strikes going on, which is abysmal and terrible, but it is a fact that there are no more, quote, boots on the ground in Afghanistan. I give him credit for that. Mainstream media attacks him the most for that because it's the best thing he did. He did get us $1,400 checks, but it was a one-time deal. And that's the problem, by the way. It's, even if he does something good, it's just a one-time deal usually, like that, stimulus package for COVID. It was a one shot of adrenaline into the economy. What you'll find is that far more progressive presidents leave lasting programs. Lasting. The other good thing Biden did is he signed an executive order to do a $15 minimum wage for every federal government employee and federal government contractor. Credit where it's due. That's wonderful. That affects 400,000 workers. I'm sure those 400,000 workers greatly appreciate it. However, again, he failed to get into the reconciliation bill to get us a national, federal $15 minimum wage. So these are areas where he failed. I also gave you some of the bright spots, but the bright spots aren't nearly enough. Let's talk about FDR. Well, literally 2 words destroy the notion that Biden is the most progressive president in U.S. history. New Deal. New Deal. On that alone, game, set, match, done. How about Lyndon B. Johnson? 3 words destroy the notion that Biden's the most progressive president in U.S. history. War on poverty. He got a lot of crap because he did what's called a guns and butter approach. And so the guns part is he continued Vietnam, which was an absolute disaster. But the butter approach was, let's do a war on poverty. Now, despite what right-wing hacks tell you, the statistics show, the numbers show, it was actually wildly successful. If we didn't do the war on poverty, we would have been a lot worse off. So just on that alone, FDR is more progressive, LBJ is more progressive in terms of how they dealt with politics behind the scenes. By the way, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, that was LBJ. And by the way, it's a historical fact, it's on the record that he was a vicious racist, and he still signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. That is more progressive than anything Joe Biden has ever done and probably will ever do. Now, I hope I'm wrong about that, but I highly doubt it. And then finally, and this is probably the most important point, to show you just how wrong Torres is here, there's an argument that even a modern-era Republican president was more progressive than Joe Biden. Who am I talking about? Richard Nixon. So what did Nixon do? Well, Nixon gave us the EPA. He gave us OSHA. He gave us the Consumer Product Safety Act, which is, one of the reasons why when we have a recall, we can get the recall done really quickly if there's a problem with the product. He did the Clean Air Act. He did the Clean Water Act. He did the Endangered Species Act. He expanded Medicare to disabled people under the age of 65 years old. Richard Nixon, in many ways, was more progressive than Joe Biden. So this idea that he's the most progressive president in U.S. history is hilarious. And by the way, what these guys like to do is rig the game. How? By just taking whatever the proposals are and pretending like that's the end of the conversation. So the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package, if it passed, it would be the biggest transformation of the U.S. economy since the New Deal. So then I still don't think it'd be correct that he's the most progressive in U.S. history, but you'd have a much better argument if the $3.5 trillion did pass. Well, guess what? It didn't, and they're currently whittling it down, whittling it down, and whittling it down, and it's ultimately going to be under $2 trillion, and it's going to be nothing. There's going to be nothing in it that's permanent, which really defines a legacy. If Joe Biden just gave us free college and paid family leave, those 2 programs, and made them permanent, that'd be much better than this, smorgasbord of half measures, which is what we're looking at here with the under $2 trillion deal, which will probably come out soon. So, I mean, just ridiculous, man. Who are you kidding when you say something like this? Are you depending on everybody to be colossally ignorant? Apparently the answer is yes.